we'll get over to the wild card game down in Santa Clara. Again, the stadium is not located in San Francisco. There's no Golden Gate Bridge in Santa Clara, Bell. I don't think so. I haven't been to. I've been to Santa Clara once, and there was no
Definitely
bridge.
not.
Let's get to that game. Obviously, not the result we wanted, but overall, there's hope with this team, and the first half looked hopeful, right?
It did, yeah. So we did go into the first half with I believe, 3-point lead. Unfortunately, the Seahawks did lose 41-23 in Santa Clara to the 49ers. A few key points here that I jotted while watching was just, of course, that 3-point lead into halftime. And then after the half, the 49ers just were commanding. They took back the lead, incorporated several players on offense, and just never let up. So costly mistakes by the Hawks also kept them out of this one. Deebo Samuel, of course, it was his first game back. He definitely made his presence. He had a total of 165 yards in this one. And then just kind of something that, okay, we'll move into offensive players of the game.
You mentioned him, so I showed him, so I apologize for going early there.
It's okay. No, you're fine. So we can go ahead and move on to our offensive players of the game here. So Charles and I both chose DK. If you watched our preview video, I did say that DK was going to be a key player in this one, and he definitely showed up. He ties Randy Moss with 3 receiving career touchdowns of 50-plus yards in the postseason. In this specific game, he had 10 receptions, 136 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So a great game for Metcalf, who was catching some pretty insane balls there. Anything else that you'd like to say just in terms of the game or what you noticed?
Not necessarily with sorry, I apologize for that. Well, I guess we'll do players of the game and then we'll go back to sort of discussion. DK, it was a good thing to point that out. I mean, there was that 51 or 50 yarder where he beat, I think it was Jimmy Ward down the sideline. I could be wrong. It might be the other Ward. Because I know they have Jimmy Ward. I believe it's a C Ward. Down the sideline, I was like, oh, shoot. Okay. You kind of bring yourself into this game after the Kenneth Walker scored the first touchdown of the game for the Seahawks. He held up his part. I know that I mentioned Geno as my key guy there, needed him to be in rhythm. And there were certainly some points where it felt like that was happening. I mean, there was one drive. I think it was that first drive where the first drive, scoring drive, where Ken Walker broke a couple of good ones. Geno scrambled, and it was like, okay, you're able to create some stuff. Because again, that was something that we did talking about in our preview, right? Was the secondary isn't exactly like the strongest thing in the world, and I know a lot of people are like, who's going to stop San Francisco in the NFC? I'm like, their secondary really isn't honestly that great, and I don't think exactly, if Jalen Hurts is healthy, that Philly's a bad matchup for them. Who's guarding AJ Brown? Who's guarding AJ Brown? You guard AJ Brown, that's fine. Who's guarding help me, Devonta Smith on the other side?
Devonta Smith, yep.
Right. They still got Dallas Goedert. Miles Sanders has been playing all right, so maybe he helps give you a punch offensively. That you still got to account for Jalen Hurts. We're not an Eagles show though. So that's why I'm not entirely scared of the 49ers to win the Super Bowl. DK, I think, that was something too, I think we mentioned in the preview, was that DK shows up in these playoff games, and he showed up, and it was good to see that sort of take place there. And I mean, he played his part on the offensive side of the ball. It was just tough with this offense, and we'll get to that in talking points. But there's always these things where I put my player of the game down, and then I see your pick, and I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. And it happened again when you went with Ryan Neal here on the defensive side of the ball. I went with Bruce. Oops, I almost whacked my mic there. Bruce, 5 total tackles, 4 solo, 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and a QB hit. This is a guy who retired twice already, I believe. He's on his 3rd stint with the Seahawks, and 1 sack, 2 tackles for loss, and a QB hit for a guy that is a relatively older guy. I don't mean to be negative, but when you look at it, and when a guy like him at his age, I guess I don't want to call him old, but when he's contributing that to the Seahawks defense, and you're not necessarily seeing that production from other guys on the D line or even the linebacker spot, it says a lot. And obviously I think everybody in the fan base knows this, that with these top picks that you have in this draft, I don't know if you go anywhere for free agency for that. You have to spend it on defensive players and ideally front seven players. I think you're fine in the secondary, honestly, and that's somebody I want to talk about when we do our sort of offseason preview and our year in review with the Seahawks. Is Ryan Neal is a guy who's come in and played really well several times for this Seahawks team when he's been a Seahawk, not just this year, but when Jamal Adams has gone down with injury, which unfortunately has been a few times, right? Neal comes in and he plays great ball. He's one that, I don't like to use Pro Football Focus as a great measuring stick just because some of their stuff seems kind of flawed and I get a lot of its numbers, but he was is a Pro Football Focus All Pro, the only Seahawk to be named to that, even in the real All Pro. I believe he got some votes, and he was a guy that in this game, obviously you look at his impact to this game. He was key. I know he was down for a few weeks. And Seattle needed that. They had Jonathan Abram, who made a key mistake, and we'll get to that you pointed out in your notes. And they had like Josh Jones, I think, was injured. Tease Tabor got in there. Josh Jones. It's those, it gets kind of thin after that. But my point being is Neal has stepped in well, and he's going to be I think he could be a restricted free agent. But what I gathered is he seems like he's interested in coming back, and he doesn't sound like he's got plans to go elsewhere, which is good because I want a guy like Ryan Neal in the secondary who doesn't complain a lot that I've seen. He comes in and he's been able to be versatile. He can come and tackle, and he can cover. So he's a versatile safety that I'd want on my team. So I'll let you talk about Ryan too, but he's somebody that's, I guess, in my opinion, has been kind of, it's kind of like an unsung hero. And I think as the years have gone on, he's become more and more noticed by the fan base as he's gotten more of that spotlight as that's gone on.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, he was injured for a little while there. He was announced healthy and able to play on the 12th. He led in tackles for this game. He had 10 tackles, 8 solo, 2 assisted. And I think, again, mentioning that first half and the things that really went right in that first half, there was one of the first defensive plays where McCaffrey went wide and Neal met him right at I think he got like a couple yards, but he didn't get the first down. And I was like, okay, if we keep playing like this is exactly what we need. We need McCaffrey to, stay to keep him as stagnant as possible. So, but that didn't necessarily happen throughout the whole game. And so we'll go back to that because I will ask just kind of what you noticed went right compared to what went wrong with those two halves.
I mean, it's funny to talk about it. The first half of this game, really didn't even seem at the beginning like it was going to go that great for Seattle. The first two drives just kind of ugly, but I expected that. This is, again, a 49ers team that we talked about in the preview, really hard to play against. Fly us to the football, great front seven. Didn't get much going in that first quarter. The 49ers playmakers were really kind of impacting that game. You saw Debo was breaking something. I think Ayuk had something. McCaffrey, they were all kind of getting rips, but Seattle was kind of bending and not breaking it. I think they held them to a field goal early on a big blitz. I think Cody Barton got a big pass deflection on third down in the red zone. And we'll talk about him when we talk about the end of the season. First quarter, yeah, but the second quarter, it felt like you ran the ball better. Ken Walker found the end zone to end the half. Jason Myers nailed a 56-yard bomb. And it was like, oh, shoot, you have a fighting chance. This is what we expected, from this team. That first half, you stayed in it. You were able to get sort of a balance there. DK was being productive. He had the second touchdown, I believe it was, for Seattle. I think it was Walker, DK, and then DK again because he didn't score anything after that. In the second half, it all just kind of came unglued. The missed tackles kind of showed up to me more in that half. This has been an issue for Seattle all season. I mean, when they had that great stretch, it seemed like they figured out how to do that again. but even to an extent, you could see some where that still took place. Penalties started to mount up. There were those 3 illegal man downfield penalties, which I've never seen that happen in a half before.
Yeah.
I think that was a key in the first half. Actually, Seattle did not get penalized in the first half.
Right.
Um, so it was just unfortunate to see that take place. I think Quentin Jefferson said about Christian McCaffrey's big run, it was like Moses, the Red Sea parted. I was like, oh man, he makes a good point. Uh, and then I want to let you say it, but there was a play where I didn't even notice it at first. I just saw Debo get up and kind of be like, what was that about? And then there was
Yeah.
a little bit of some anger
Scuffle.
afterwards. And I don't know, it just, obviously these are divisional teams, right? They've seen each other. That was their third meeting of the year. Uh, it was going to be a tough one, right? But it doesn't seem, I don't like the idea of giving the opponent anything extra to motivate them. I get it. Again, you want to get in their face, you want to get in their head to an extent, but it considering the offensive talent that this team has, I don't want to play with fire there. I've had second degree burns on my hands before. I don't want to play with fire at all. Um, yeah, it just seemed like things started to unravel, and it just all kind of snowballed for this team. And that's the thing, when I talk about um, I don't want to reflect too much on the season because we want to do that next episode when we have our full
Yeah.
season, and we'll have a longer one on our YouTube account. Um, but there are a lot of positives to take, but obvious needs and glaring issues to address. Right? We don't know. Oh, what do we need to add on offense? I've seen in mock drafts someone has wide receivers the highest need for this team. I was like, these ESPN guys don't know what the hell they're talking about. I know Marquise Goodwin's on a 1-year deal. That's fine. You could maybe add someone in the draft there. D. Eskridge, I know, was practicing this week before the wild card game. I don't think he got back. But I don't know what his deal is. I just don't think he's been available enough to warrant more chances. But you got DK and Tyler, obviously. I'm sure you could add another receiver there. Maybe bring another
Mhm.
veteran back. Goodwin was able to contribute pretty solidly throughout the course of the year. I don't think you need to add much on offense outside of some interior linemen. Austin Blythe was fine at center, but I don't see why you couldn't add another center there. The guard situation's interesting because another guy that was on our inactive list, Phil Haynes, he kind of switched throughout the year with Gabe Jackson. They kind of split playing time, which was kind of odd, right? I mean, one guy's supposed to be a starter,
Yeah.
and he splits time, which is interesting. But so interior line, I wouldn't mind having some address there. Obviously, with the tackles, you're fine, right? With Cross and Lucas, but the D line, yeah, I mean, you need some pass rushers when you run a 3-4. You need to be able to get after the ball. You need to be able to generate pressure. And inside linebacker too. I'm sorry, but Cody Barton's not a guy that I want as a starter in that 3-4 defense. You'll get Jordan Brooks back, and hopefully he's on the safe road to recovery. And even he's young, he's a younger guy, and he'll continue to learn. And he was near the top of the league in tackles for a good amount of the year, right? Barton, just too many missed tackles, too many missed assignments. Just not it. Just and again, he's been in the league for a good amount of time under Bobby Wagner, so it's like I don't know if greatness doesn't rub off as well on some people. And I know that's the greatness is a word that gets thrown around way too much, in my opinion.
Sure.
Um, it's my own thing. There's someone I'm talking about, but uh, yeah, I'm sorry. We'll get to that in season in review, but I'm not a fan. So
Yeah.
some of the big issues just kind of really showed themselves, and I think one of the plays that exemplified the game for me was Purdy evaded a sack, and he found I think it's Elijah Mitchell is his name, the running back, wide open on a check down. It's like he had the
Yes.
sack. Purdy does his little Fran Tarkenton impression, and he's got a touchdown. And it's like, man, there were a few times too where it felt like Seattle had a sack in their hands or even a tackle, and then all of a sudden the guy breaks it like he's rubbing off a wet ramen noodle. It's like, what just happened? The tackling has to be better next year. And that's just a basic thing. Doesn't matter who we're playing. We could have been playing the Packers in this game, or any team really. But if you can't tackle, people are going to take advantage of that, especially teams like San Francisco who are yards after catch specialists, right? So
Yeah.
that's how I
I
felt.
actually thought of you with Cody Barton missed tackle when Brock Purdy did get loose and ran it for the first down,
Brock
and Barton
Purdy.
just kind of like just kind of watched him go by. So
If it's Debo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey breaking tack, George Kittle, sure, but Brock Purdy, if it's not, normally I would say just quarterbacks in general, but guys like Lamar or Josh Allen who can run the football really well, or Jalen Hurts, sure, fine, they can break tackles, but Brock Purdy, come on, man, did he rub butter on himself before the game? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's how I feel. How did you, with what you saw from that game? What did you see there?
So I was following along with your live tweeting as well, and I did notice that you mentioned that that interception on Geno might have been the game swinger. However, the 49ers and Shanahan have a different game swinger that they mentioned. So they think that the dirty play on Debo from Abrams was that momentum swing. And so that's what locked the team in and really, I guess, brought out the fight in them.
Yeah, and that's what I was hinting at. I didn't want to give away because it was in Bell's notes. I just again, no need. Someone said on Twitter, to be fair, Jonathan Abram is a Raider at heart, and I was like, oh. Ah. So yeah, that just stuff, you normally don't see. Well, 49er fans that are upset will disagree, but normally you don't like to see that stuff. You don't see that stuff really from Seahawks. Um, people
So
were
do you
referencing.
agree that it was a dirty play?
Yeah, that was stupid. There was no need. That he was down and he twisted. I was like, you don't need to be twisting. I get it. Technically, it's not in the rule book kind of thing, but it's like
Yeah.
um, because I know there's history between those teams. It was funny. There was a 49ers fan I saw that was saying that this was a revenge game, and he had three photos. It was, have you seen the photo of Navarro Bowman from that NFC Championship game on the cart, and he's sitting there, and someone threw popcorn at him? That was just
Yeah.
stupid all around. I won't protect that. That was dumb. That should never happen. Navarro Bowman was a hell of a linebacker. Nobody should have that happen to them at all.
Right.
But had that photo, the tip photo, and Vernon Davis getting blasted. It was like, this is revenge. I'm like, you're playing a Seahawks team that shouldn't have been here in the first place. That technically, uh, and you are in clear win now. That's the thing with this 49ers team, right? They're clearly win now. They trade for Christian McCaffrey.
Right.
They've got all this talent on that defensive side of the ball. Uh, they're clearly win now. This is a Seahawks team that, again, was Pete and John never were going to say it, but they were in a rebuild year. They've got that incredible draft class. They've got all this draft capital. That's the thing too. I wanted to save it until we got to the discussion, but they had locker room cleanout day today, and
Yeah.
the quotes that came from it. Geno Smith was in the weight room working out. Ryan Neal was
Yep.
talking about how he was excited to be back already. There are guys, and they said there was the eager and hungry were the words that were thrown out the most. I think Ryan Neal actually said it in his post-game press conference. He said, this team's going to be great, and Seattle should be freaking excited. He said freaking, I
Yep.
guess. You never know. But so there's a lot of excitement with this team, and I don't disagree. I had my opinions, and I was wrong. Let me get in focus. I might have been wrong about it in the beginning of the season. But, with the draft class that they had, and even with some of those younger guys already, and guys like, Ryan Neal being able to come back, there's no reason to not be excited for this team going forward. And now we get to have the fun assignment of mock drafts, and we'll get to go back to that. So I'll get back in focus. Jeez, but yeah. So that's all. I'll stop yammering about that. But again, I just to before we get to next week with our recap of the season, I'm happy with what took place. I mean, this was much more than we asked for, right? So
Hmm.
this was much more than any of us could have thought. If you're saying that when we traded away Russell Wilson and released Bobby Wagner that you thought we would make the playoffs, I bet you're lying. I really bet you do. If you weren't, hey man, props to you for being there and having belief. But it was like universally kind of believed, and it was like, well, we'll see. and we saw it. It was a pretty fun ride. So that's my thoughts on it before we really get to next week and fully recap it.
I will say that we were all wrong in our score predictions because I think the highest was a 10-point swing, and I honestly did not think that they were going to rack up 41. So I'll leave that there. We'll move on to some inactives going into the game. We had Phil Haynes, Tony Jones Jr., Penny Hart, Vi Jones, Joshua
Giogu?
Diogu, Artie Burns, Xavier Crawford, and then injuries sustained during the game. Unfortunately, Daryl Taylor left the game in the second quarter. He was questionable to return with a neck stinger.
Yeah, I want to get away from those neck injuries. Very scary.
Oh, yeah. And on to some team notes here. On the 13th, we had some roster moves. They signed running back Tony Jones Jr. off the practice squad. They elevated wide receiver Cade Johnson and linebacker Alexander Johnson from practice squad, and they waived Isaiah Mack to make room on the 53-man roster. On the 11th, Quandre Diggs was named to the NFC Defensive Player of the Week for Week 18. If we go back to Week 18 against the Rams, in an overtime of a must-win, he intercepted a Baker Mayfield deep ball that, had Diggs not intervened, would have resulted in a long catch for receiver Van Jefferson, who very well could have scored on the play, or at the very least put the Rams in range for a game-winning field goal. Instead, Diggs recognized the threat as the play unfolded, and Jefferson ran open. He broke on the ball, and then he undercut Jefferson just in time to snag the ball and give the Seahawks possession for what ended up being the game-winning drive. On some not so happy, but I mean, we might think that some players got snubbed. But anyway, no Seahawks named to the all-pro teams, but some did earn votes. Those that earned votes were Tariq Woolen, Quandre Diggs, Ryan Neal, Jordan Brooks. They all earned votes. So any opinion on that, on them not actually getting named?
To all-pro, not necessarily. It was really interesting this year because I believe all-pro had a significant vote dedicated to the players, so a lot of players were involved in that. So I don't know. It's interesting, but my more concern with, like, particularly looking at the first name that you mentioned on there is when we get to the official awards closer to the Super Bowl, because I don't know, there was some post that was like, who's the rookie of the year? And it was Aiden Hutchinson and Sauce Gardner. I was like, really? You're putting Hutchinson in there?
Really?
I was like, okay, a guy that was tied for the league in interceptions and passes deflected. And I think it should be Tariq Woolen. Offensive side of the ball, it gets a little bit trickier because Walker did miss some games. Garrett Wilson had a solid year. Chris Olave had a solid year as well in New Orleans. So I could see it getting more muddied up there, but you could have legitimate qualms with both of those guys being their respective sides of the ball trophy winners there. I think when it comes to comeback player of the year, I think it should be Geno. I mean, that with the way that it happened, him being there. So you could argue that some Seahawks should take home some hardware, but all pro, I can understand it. I can understand it. I guess the guy out of there most I'd want to see is Neal or Woolen, but it's tough there. Just with the general votes of the league, because some guys might not, different divisions might not recognize it. Seattle being where it is, this and that. So I don't have too much qualm with that personally. I don't know what your thoughts on it.
I just don't think any of these guys should hold their head down for not getting it. So, I mean, all great names that deserve to at least have votes. So at least they were acknowledged in that way.
Yeah, that's a key thing, right? Because the longest time Russell Wilson never had an MVP vote, and it was like, you didn't even get a vote, let alone an award. So that's a good point. I like that.
On the 14th, it was announced that the Hawks want Geno Smith back next year. The veteran QB will return to the Seahawks in 2023, may receive the franchise tag if there is no agreement on the long-term deal. Smith shows mutual interest post-game, saying that he wants to stay in Seattle. Says that the Seahawks and 12s embraced him during a career season. I know that I saw some comments saying that we should take a QB in the draft. I don't know how many people feel that way, but I think that we give Smith at least another chance, especially with him taking us this far this year. So I'm not sure.
I think he's earned it.
On that. Yeah.
I mean, like, if you think about it, right? with your number 5 pick, absolutely not. Do not. No, no. You just again, you look at the way that the Seahawks offense put up points this year. We're looking at Geno, right? Granted, there were some mistakes made. It was his
Yeah.
first full year starting since what he was in New York with the Jets, and that was I want to say like it's ancient, but I'm gonna offend people. They're like, I'm old. I'm like, I get it, dude. It was like what 13, 12, like early part of the
Been a
decade,
while.
right? So like I get it. That was a kind of the understanding in press conferences I read is like Pete Carroll thought, okay, he's going to be able to learn more. This another off season is because remember he didn't enter this last off season as a starter. I thought as a moron that he was Drew Lock was going to be the starter. I
I
was
thought the
wrong.
same thing.
Well, we were wrong. Fair enough, right? But get him the full offseason dedicated as a starter, sure. Because even in the beginning of the offseason, he didn't necessarily know that because that Russell Wilson trade happened. So
Mhm.
you know, um, he's got the locker room obviously in his hands. I mean, if you look at the quotes about him, it's not like the guy's like disliked. The locker room is a really big fan of him. He's obviously capable in terms of the deep ball. I mean, he had some great throws. You look back, you talked about with Diggs with that player of the week, that Rams game, that ball to Tyler Lockett was a
Yeah.
beautiful ball. And he's mobile. He can run the football as well. I'm not saying he's as fast as Lamar Jackson or as tough as Josh Allen, but he's proven he can run the ball as well. I just don't see it uh, playing out to where Geno doesn't earn at least a 2-year deal. I know that it's been talked about that if a full length agreement isn't made, that they could use a franchise tag on him, which it'd be fine. But yeah, with the needs you have on this defense and the fact that you can get young talent, young high caliber talent. With the Seahawks haven't had this sort of pick in years. Well, obviously last year they had the pick with Cross, but they don't have this sort of stuff. They could turn it into other picks, but I really think this is a spot you add defensively. And with the draft hype train that always happens, right? It's already happening with Will Levis right now. Will Levis is being talked about as a potential number 1 guy. Really? Do we think that? Like, do we honestly think that? So it's like maybe Will Anderson falls to us. I don't think who's buddy from Georgia? I don't know his name. The dude from Georgia on the defensive line is kind of agreed as like a top 3 pick. Shoot, maybe somehow he falls to us, like Shane Wright fell to the Kraken at number 4. Who knows? I just don't think drafting that high. Maybe no, I don't know. I just don't think that's smart this year. Maybe later on in the draft, I think. Ooh, well, actually, I've seen some stuff that says next year's draft for quarterbacks will be pretty good too. I know Bo Nix will be in that draft. Michael Penix will be in that draft. I don't know, man. I just
Hey.
don't think this year is the year to do that. I think Geno's earned another year at minimum, at very minimum. I think we talked about it last week, right? I think 2 years is where I'm going to go
Yeah.
with that. But I think very minimum, he's your starting quarterback next year, just considering everything, how capable the offense was this year. Even battling through injuries, right? Tyler Lockett, we thought he might be out for the rest of the year with that
Yeah.
finger injury. Ken Walker wasn't fully healthy. Rashad Penny, remember him? I mean, Will Dissly was out for the last few weeks. So it's like, it just doesn't make sense to me personally. I don't know. I want to get your thoughts on that as well. But considering areas of need, it's like
Yeah, that's what I
I've
was
got a
gonna say.
hoodie on
It's
right now. Do I need to go buy another one? No. If I'm wearing my shirt underneath and I'm cold, sure, maybe I do. It's not a need. Some people want that, and I get that. You're not looking at Geno Smith as a guy who's going to be the quarterback in 2026. Probably not. You know, uh, that's going to be someone that's likely get someone, develop them, then we go from there. But that's not at least with a top pick. Maybe they do something in one of the later rounds. I don't know. I just don't think it's worth wasting that sort of pick. Not necessarily wasting, right? But using it considering the other talent that you need to add on the
yes.
defensive side of the ball. That's my
Yeah.
rant-a-lanta.
I completely agree. I think there are other areas that you need to address before you even think about a quarterback. So We'll move on here to our 2023 opponents who have been released already on home games. Divisional opponents are the Cardinals, the Rams, and the 49ers, of course. We also have the Philadelphia Eagles, the Washington Commanders, Cleveland Browns, Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Carolina Panthers. In away games, division opponents, once again, the Cardinals, the Rams, the Niners. But we also have the Dallas Cowboys, the New York Giants, the Baltimore Ravens, the Cincinnati Bengals, Detroit Lions, and Tennessee Titans. Which one of those names are you most excited about?
Excited about?
Yes.
Just in terms of the game it'll present,
Yeah.
I think the Eagles game will be fun. I think that'll be fun here. Eagles, Panthers, after this game. Steelers will be interesting just considering where they go in this offseason. I know they produced a decent season, all things considered. Kenny Pickett, maybe get him some more time to develop. I'd love to see the Seahawks smash Deshaun Watson when the Browns come to town. But that Eagles game, I think they're built to be pretty good for the next few years. I think their line's going to get older, but they've got some good young talent. But when we talk about defensive needs, right? We just talked about that, stopping the run. Look at just the away games, not even talking about Philadelphia and what they can do on the ground, Cleveland and Nick Chubb, Carolina and what they did to us. You look at the away games, right? Just the away games. Dallas and Dak Prescott, Ezekiel Elliott, Baltimore. I don't know who's going to be quarterback for Baltimore next year. You played the Giants again, Saquon Barkley. The Bengals, that air game is not necessarily what I'm talking about, but I'm seeing a lot of teams that can run the football. You got to be able to stop them, right?
Yeah.
So again, positions of need is all I'm saying. That's
I'm going to circle that one because of the Philly Eagles game, because you're right. I think that one is going to be an exciting one to be at. So
that seems like a potential primetime game.
Yeah, it does.
I'm not a schedule maker.
But we'll find out, maybe. Moving on to some league news here. Coaching carousel. The Broncos are casting a wide net for a new head coach. They've requested interviews with Sean Payton, Jim Harbaugh, DeMeco Ryans, and 2 others. 2 head coach candidates emerged for the Colts. Lions OC Ben Johnson, Rams DC Raheem Morris among candidates that Indy has requested to interview. McVay was letting his assistant coaches job hunt. The Rams assistants were granted permission to look for jobs with other teams while McVay decided his future. It was later announced McVay told the team that he will return as the Rams head coach. There is a Sean Payton saga going on as well. Denver wants Sean Payton. The Broncos see Jim Harbaugh as the backup option if Payton doesn't take the head coach job. Denver reportedly leads the race for Payton. The Broncos are the frontrunner to land the head coach who liked their stable ownership and would be happy to work with Russ. And the Panthers are also in on Payton. Carolina received permission to interview Super Bowl winning head coach, and they joined Arizona, Denver, and Houston in their pursuit. On the 10th, it was announced that while Hamlin is home in the sense of being back in Buffalo, he's not quite home yet. The Bills safety says that he is undergoing further tests at Buffalo Hospital after getting transferred from Cincinnati. So, hoping for nothing but a full recovery for Hamlin there. We go back to our Seahawks here, who ended their season 9-9. Of course, they ended the regular season second in the NFC West. Couldn't quite make it through the Niners there in the Super Wild Card weekend. Yeah, I think you mentioned the locker room, and we were talking about this previously too, how other players on other teams have been visibly upset after losses, and that's not really the vibe that the Seahawks are giving. So that's definitely a positive note, and I think something that we ride on to look forward to next season.